Welcome to the Top Order podcast. Just the English contingent with us this evening. We're going to talk a little bit of aftermath of that second test at the Basin Reserve. Leading into the third test at Seddon Park, we'll talk Yorkshire batters primarily from an England perspective, any team changes coming up for this third test, and we'll also touch a little bit on overrates and Jason Gillespie's resignation as Pakistan Test coach, all coming up on this little mini episode of the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, Jamie, we don't have the fancy equipment with us this evening, so there's no graphic effects. We'll put those in post afterwards. But you and I are not able to join the boys, I think, on Sunday when they recorded after this test. You were ill and I was hungover, is the official verdict coming out of both camps. But we're about a day and a bit away from the start of the third and final test of this what's been a fascinating England-New Zealand test series, coming hot on the heels of the same sort of series just over a year, 18 months or so ago in New Zealand as well. A lot of history between these two teams. The boys have obviously done a review, and Lippy's drowned his sorrows, and then the boys have also covered 1-1 in that India-Australia series. That game coming up on Saturday, the third test in Brisbane. We won't talk too much about that because the boys covered that earlier in the week. But where I want to start really is some comments from Darren Lehmann after Joe Root's 36th Test 100, which takes him to nearly 13,000 test runs at just a tick under 51. And Darren Lehmann saying that Joe Root is a rung below Virat Kohli, Kane Williamson and Steve Smith. And I guess my question for you, is this just Darren Lehmann trying to get a bit of relevance and perhaps a radio gig for the Ashes next year? Or is there any merit in that comment, given Root obviously not having 100 down under, at least not down under in Australia? What are our thoughts of those comments from him? And then we can perhaps move on to Joe Root and Harry Brook, his Yorkshire teammates' impact on this second test in New Zealand.
Yeah, kind of fascinating comments, aren't they? I think, really. I mean, I did listen to an interview that Lehmann did as well, where he sort of sought to qualify the fact that, he has a good relationship with Joe Root, and in effect it was just a bit of, bit of kidology, bit of playing around and so forth. And he almost said as well, I'm happy to give you some advice, Joe, when you come down under, if you need, if you want me to coach you. And I guess that kind of stems from sort of previous history of working or coming into contact with each other. I suppose, when you look at it, it is a slight blemish on that record, isn't it, really? And it's quite unusual to explain that everywhere else he goes, he dominates. But maybe in Australia, either he's been slightly unlucky, he's come up against some decent attacks. I think probably England have typically been under the cosh when he's gone with England. When they've played there, not always, been in a confident state. They've often got pretty severely battered by the Aussies. So I think there's a number of factors, really. I can't imagine Root would be thinking too much about that. I'm not sure he needs too much more confidence than he perhaps has. He'll be focusing on all the stuff that he needs to do to play well, I would imagine. But I guess it's probably at the back of his mind. If Lehmann is saying to be considered amongst the greats, you've got to score everywhere, then maybe it is there. Maybe it is languishing at the back of his mind and could have an impact. It's a tricky one, isn't it? I don't know what your thoughts are on when you heard it. I was quite astonished, I have to be honest, given his, like you say, 36 Test hundreds, ridiculous amount of runs, phenomenal player, and then to make that, I wondered if the Aussie mental disintegration had started, well over 12 months out. So
look, I guess when I initially heard the comments, and they were on a radio show that's known for its sort of sensationalism. I think a morning show. I think it's had Tim Payne amongst its guests. Plenty of hyperbole and bullshit from him as well on that radio show. And then I think in the aftermath of that, I've seen Michael Vaughan weigh in quite severely on it as well, which probably actually just, when you actually read what he said and you read the press around it. Vaughan obviously going into bat for Root and saying poppycock, and I think just
Mm.
two former players who are both in and around the media now, probably
Yeah.
just trying to get their Instagram views and hits and Twitter views and hits up leading into the series, because he did go on, as you say, to categorise it by saying, he is a great of the game, but that's the little blemish on his record. And
Mm.
look, I don't want to go too deeply into it, but I think, if we're going to level that kind of argument, then certainly we can riposte Darren Lehmann by saying, well, was Bradman really that good? Because he didn't play a massive amount of Test cricket in India or Pakistan, really played
Mm.
most of his tests against England and South Africa. And I'm
Yeah.
sure that argument would get rubbished, and I'd expect it to, because the
Yeah.
guy
Yeah.
averaged 99. So I think it's fish and chip paper, to be perfectly honest. But Root, I think in the back of his mind, will have a little point to prove. He was
Mm.
dropped, I think, for the only time in his Test career in Australia in that 2013-14 series. Obviously had a season there as a skipper where it didn't go to plan as well. So, I think he will be wanting to take this form that he's had, particularly actually against the Kookaburra ball. If we look at his record over the course of the last 2 or 3 winters, pretty decent and scoring at a really, really good lick. He will want to set that record straight. If we segue, Jamie, into the second Test match,
Mm.
certainly a good Test match for England, and certainly a good Test match for Yorkshire. And that age-old adage: if you've got a strong Yorkshire, you've got a strong England. We've seen Harry Brook again shine in that first innings total of, what was it, 280, with a flawless and chanceless 100, in contrast to his, let's say, slightly streakier affair in that first Test match. And then Joe Root scoring 100 in the declaration in the second innings. So runs all round for the Yorkshire boys, which has seen Harry Brook leapfrog Joe Root to the top of the ICC men's Test batting rankings. So Yorkies at number 1 and number 2. When we just look at those stats, Harry Brook some 23 games into his career, so just 140 or so short of Joe Root currently. 38 digs and averaging just over 60, with 800s in the bank already in his 23 Test matches. Just how good can this lad be, Jamie? And what do you see? I think the first time I'm going to throw this sort of component to you. What is it that you see in his mentality and his sort of demeanour that's making him so successful 20 or so games into his Test career?
Yeah, I mean, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago on the show, he's a phenomenal talent, isn't he? And I think having probably the two teammates in the squad in some ways, I'm hypothesizing, but I guess he's quite motivational. They seem to have a really strong relationship. They communicate very clearly. They seem to, I think, Root has perhaps maybe taken on a bit of a mentor role as well and try to pass on. So I think all those things are really nourishing in a team environment. And going back to our previous conversation, it's worth remembering that I think that some players are not motivated by personal accolades, by the stats, by the numbers. That they can in essence be motivated by mastering the game and developing new shots and developing different ways of manipulating the ball and taking different guards and all that thing, because actually that's the thing that really gets the juices flowing. And I think the impressive thing mentally about Brook is the fact that often, I guess, with other people would talk about the Roger Federer effect, that actually if you were to drop down and typically watch Roger Federer play tennis in the latter part of his career, you would just see a flat line. You wouldn't see the highs and the lows. You wouldn't see the anger or the disappointment. You would just see almost like a metronome. And I think both Root and Brook have that in abundance. So there'll be other players that would do that, but I think it's their ability to kind of look like they're really enjoying it, play true to themselves. Probably we've spoken a lot about stay on the process rather than the outcome. It looks like neither of them really think about the consequences of their actions. I mean, and I think that is such a brave mindset to have in professional sport, to really not be too worried about what happens. or what people think or what people say. I think that's it's really tough to do. But if you can nail it, if you can develop those strategies where you kind of go into your bubble and you focus on the things that you're doing and have fun when you're out there, which he clearly looks like he's doing. I think you sort of nailed sport in many senses. The consistency in his routine is another thing as well. We talk about often that kind of being a bit of a metronome in terms of how you prepare and pre-delivery and stuff. I think he's very consistent, but also as well in between deliveries, you'd often see him quite relaxed, laughing and joking. And sometimes to the naked eye, that can look like, oh, he doesn't care. He doesn't look like he's focused. But impossible to concentrate for a full day's cricket. So sort of dimmer switch down on the light, as it were, preserve your energy, mental energy, and then turn it up as the bowler gets to their run. Excellent skills, really. So, without turning this into a psychology lesson, I guess they're just some of the key things that I would say. Also, as well, I think his body language, if he gets beaten, or if a bowler's having a go, there's quite a wry, cheeky smile. I think, he would give a bit back as well. So I think the body language is typically good. He's not afraid of that confrontation. So, just a really good all-round package, I think.
Yeah. The final question I'll have, we won't delve too much into the psychology, but I'm really keen to ask the question because of the points that you've made. Is it that they're better at, I guess, diminishing that sort of, the two guys, one on either shoulder, that's, saying don't do that and, worry about that? Is it that they're much better at being able to almost fake, or lie to themselves that the outcome's not important? Or do they genuinely believe that that outcome isn't important? And then I guess the follow-up question to that is there any sort of, I guess, history or knowledge that you have of guys who finished their career who have been that Iceman or that metronome actually saying, well, no, realistically, I was just really good at masking the fact that it didn't matter to me. Deep down, it really, really did. So I guess, are they faking it, or are they genuinely believing that outcome doesn't matter and it's all about the process and having fun and enjoying and as this England team say, living in the moment?
Yeah, I think sometimes there is an element of faking. It's kind of like you can put that persona on. It is all about perception. I guess when you walk out to the crease, if you hold your head high, if your shoulders are back, if you jog out rather than walk out, they're all assertive behaviours. Equally, how you react to getting beat on the outside edge or an LBW decision turned down. I think you can mask that. Particularly in the early part of your innings, where typically I think most people are likely to have some apprehension. We often hear the phrase now, well, getting into their work. It's a little bit like, I sometimes think of it, Sunday night syndrome before you used to go back to school. There's always that air of, oh, what's it going to be like on Monday morning? And I think that's pretty typical of any sports person. And I think what experience probably tells them is that, they've got the strategies, what they do works, they trust their process, and they know that those feelings and that uncertainty is just maybe because they care and because it's just their job. But it doesn't necessarily mean that anything bad is going to happen. I think that there probably are certain moments in an innings where maybe the outcome does become important. If you're thinking about needing X number to win a match, you'd be some sort of, I guess, ice person not to be able to look at the scoreboard and let that have an impact. But again, I think just being able to sort of recognise that's key information that's going to help me do my job, rather than that's key information that's creating a stressor for me. I think again is part of the art of kind of what makes these guys mentally very, very good.
Yeah. Let's probably turn our attentions, and we said at the top this will be a relatively short stint for us because the guys
Sure.
covered obviously a pretty comprehensive review of that test match earlier in the week. But we are, as I said, about a day or so away from the start of this third test match in Hamilton. We'll perhaps talk a little bit about the Black Caps first. So Devon Conway definitely misses out. He's off to be at the birth of his first child, and obviously, in the modern era, we've seen that happen a hell of a lot. Black Caps have called Mark Chapman into the squad, but that's the kind of batting cover, really. We're going to expect to see what I know Stu would have wanted to see all along, and that's Will Young in this side. And the likelihood is they won't make any changes to the order. Will Young will just slot in neatly to Devon Conway's spot. Probably the other question for the Black Caps is that Mitchell Santner might come into contention on his home ground, Seddon Park in Hamilton, is probably a venue in New Zealand where, the flat pitch and the fact that it is a bit drier might come into contention for another spin option there. And that'll probably be at the expense of one of those seamers, with Tim Southee almost, I think going to play in this final test. That's his home ground as well for Northern District. Sure. So it's his swan song. But anything you want to cover from a Black Caps perspective as they go into hopefully steal a test match out of this dead rubber series now?
I think the Southee one's interesting, isn't it? The role of sentimentality in sport versus trying to get the job done. I always think that's an interesting debate, and I love sentimentality. I love nostalgia, but sometimes that it looks like is that a wise selection maybe given current form, but maybe with the series gone it matters less. Maybe that is where the sort of the sentiment can does have a place and does have a role. I think I guess flipping it from maybe an England perspective, will they go with two spinners if it is likely to turn? We sort of mused on the idea: do England stick or twist? Do you build for the future, i.e., do you blood people, give them a test cap, or do you kind of build the confidence in the group that you've got? I think those are, and maybe New Zealand are thinking the same as well with the series gone. Is this an opportunity to try stuff, to experiment? And maybe if I was coach of either, I'd perhaps be thinking in that way. This is an opportunity to experiment a little bit as well. It's not a dead rubber, but it's kind of like it's perhaps less important than the first or second test now that the series is kind of been won. So I don't know what you think of that, but you might have a different strategy, mate.
Yeah, the Southee one's an interesting one. I think obviously he's announced that this is his last summer of Test cricket for New Zealand. I personally don't like that. I don't like you sort of announcing your own leaving do. To be perfectly honest, I think. Look, it is more complicated than that. We've got central contracts to think about, and if you retire, then you may not be entitled to your full contract, and all these kind of factors come into it. But ultimately, I think the moment you start to telegraph when your last test match is, particularly if you're David Warner and you do it about 3 years out, because you want to make sure they've got enough time to make some bunting or whatever. It kind of drags on, and it probably distracts a little bit from the ethos of what is a team sport. On this occasion, when you think of the personnel, I think the fact that it is going to be a final test on his home ground, I think there is an element of sentimentality there. I wonder what would have happened if, for example, we've seen Matt Henry, been pretty consistent. We've seen sort of glimmers from other seamers in that New Zealand team as well. O'Rourke has been really, really good over the course of the last 18 months. So I think where we get to is if this had been one each, I think that this becomes a much bigger conversation, because then it's around winning a series. As it is, I think that this test match does have a little bit more on it for New Zealand, because there's still the World Test Championship for them to play for. Whereas, and look, I don't propose that we go into the details of the maths, Jamie, because I'll get it wrong, but England are almost no chance of qualifying, even if everything goes their way in other games. But New Zealand's still a pretty decent chance, so they will want to go in and win this game. I think really the question now for the Black Caps is, do they get Santner in? And if they do that, is that at the expense of their all-rounder, or is it at the expense of one of those sort of batting guys that might bowl a little bit of spin, like, potentially Glenn Phillips? For England, I'll pose the question to you. I guess what is most important? Is it win the third test, or is it have a look at maybe one or two of the guys that have been in this squad for the course of the series? So Ollie Robinson, not the seamer Ollie Robinson, the wicketkeeper Ollie Robinson has obviously joined as wicketkeeper or wicket-keeping cover, it turns out. We've got Ryan Ahmed, Jack Leach, Matthew Potts and Ollie Stone also at the moment wearing the bibs in the dugout. And we've seen, I think we've seen a pretty decent hint from Ben Stokes overnight, which is he said he thought he got a little bit too focused on the Ashes leading into the last sort of 6 or 7 months for England. And he's urging England now to stay in the now, which I think has been the vernacular they've had for a while. But I think we have seen a little bit of a diversion away from that, getting ready for this Ashes. So I expect that kind of rhetoric points to same team, let's go again. But and I think that that's the right thing to do. So from my perspective, that would be where I would go. But yeah, interested to get your thoughts on whether or not you might go the other route and blood some players, particularly ahead of, a winter in, yes, not similar conditions, but similar part of the world this time next year.
Yeah, I'd probably be similar, to be honest, mate, because I think unless the conditions are dictating that you require different players in, then you could potentially have a negative effect. I'm just thinking of, Rehan Ahmed, if it's not going to turn, okay, it'd be good to have a test experience, but actually if it's not going to be helpful, then maybe it's more helpful to bowl in the nets where you can work on that and get some feedback around the ball spinning. So I think pitch conditions will clearly play a role as we get closer to that. I also think as well workload that some of these guys have had as well. They're very they're monitored. All players aren't they, in terms of their workload, in terms of their GPS and so forth. So I think that will play into it. If anyone's carrying any niggles, equally, it's probably important that those things are assessed, perhaps, and maybe people are taken out if that's any concern. But I think I'd be with you. I think this group of players have come together for this series, and so far they've done a really good job. So kind of carry that on. There's a whole batch of test matches ahead before we get to the Ashes. So you've still got time to bring in some of these players in more favourable conditions to their skill set. So I think I would kind of finish the year on a real high if possible. But as I say, if you rock up at Hamilton and you think it's going to turn or whatever, then potentially you would drop a seamer and maybe bring a spinner in, I guess. But yeah, that would be where I'd be at.
Yeah, look, absolutely. For me, pick the best 11 for this test match, and that might mean a change, but I think if unless the conditions or, as you say, injury dictate that, also the fact they finished this test match in record quick time again in the Basin. They've had an extra couple of days off, so you would hope that from a recovery perspective, the seamers should be able to back up if they're asked to do so. And that leads us probably on talking about the seamers and workloads to something which has kind of raised its head over the course of the last couple of test matches. And I've got to admit, this is the first sort of whiff that I've got about this, which is that the captains at the end of each test match are asked to fill out probably a mountain of paperwork, whether they are super sustainable and do it on an iPad or whether they've got a little printout. We don't know. But Ben Stokes has apparently refused to sign one of those pieces of paperwork after every test match now for the last wee while, relating to the over rates, particularly because England have been fined and docked World Test Championship points for their over rate. And Ben Stokes' argument, I think, is, we've won games with a day and a half to spare, yet we're all losing pretty significant amounts of money, actually. 15%, I think, of their match fees. And then obviously, this has had an impact on the World Test Championship. We've had teams that have missed out on finals because of over rates. Where do we stand, I guess, on that? I've always had a view that I'd be pretty draconian about it, and I'd start to, amputate the legs of, offending captains or, throw them in jail for a few days if they can't get their guys to bowl 15 overs in an hour. But, yeah, I guess hearing some of the rationale from Ben Stokes, I'm slightly softening, but yeah, keen really to get your view on whether it's old fashioned thinking or whether there's some merit in his argument.
Yeah, I had a similar debate really, I think, because I think, there's part of me as a fee paying test test consumer, I want to see 90 overs in a day. But then if the test match is going to last 2.5 days and it's going to be super exciting, I think I'd be prepared to probably compromise on that. So I think in England's sense, it's probably a moot point at the moment because the argument that they're playing exhilarating, exciting cricket clearly has evidence behind it. I think when you maybe see other test nations that are down at 12, 13 hours an hour, I think that's where you kind of think, oh, this is really slow, taking lots of time in between deliveries. I think that it can really, and I guess it's tactical, isn't it? They're trying to take time out of the game. They're trying to maybe bring about some frustration in the batters and so forth. Just so they do something rash or they're tinkering with the fields. And I think, yeah, that's the side of the game which I'm not sure I'm a fan of. But yeah, I don't really know where you go with it really, because fines kind of work but don't really work. So yeah,
And Jamie, the other point that he made, I think, was if you look at cricket in the subcontinent, you'll typically get 50, 60, even 70 or 80 overs worth of spin in a 90 over day. Whereas particularly at home in England, and certainly, in the test series we're playing here, seam has played obviously a much larger part. It will in Australia as well. So the argument being that clearly you are going to bowl your overs more quickly in, where you've got someone running in 3 steps. And your keeper's only got to go 21 meters or whatever it is to get from end to end.
yeah.
So is there a way that there's some kind of model that can be put in place? I guess really, really difficult to make it subjective about whether or not the day's been entertaining. But I think if this hadn't have been brought up in the media, I don't think I would have noticed the over rates in this series. I think you notice them when you're seeing dull cricket,
Yeah.
and then you're looking at the number of overs bowled in the day. I certainly can't recall a time in the last 3 or 4 years where I've looked at a day's England cricket and gone, have we had enough overs today? Because you've been enthralled by the product that's been put in front of you. But yeah, that question around spin and seam is probably the only one for me to ponder on.
Yeah, and I think it's a little, I kind of think some of the underpinning behind this is, who is this over rate for? So what's it kind of for? And I always had the view it's for the spectator, it's to the consumer, it's to kind of, but equally there's probably a, get people moving as well. You can't be bowling 10 hours and over or whatever, or people will be asleep. So I always think, who's it for? And if it's for the spectators, then equally we not only look at over rate, but probably need to look at some of the conditions where people are taken off a bad light and where bad light is offered. And I mean, in England we're notorious for we think you could play here, but because they've taken a meter reading or whatever, and you've got
Yeah,
floodlights. I often think that's not who's that for? Who's that serving? Like, doesn't really feel as though it's serving the spectator, because how many times have we sat at a test ground and you're going, well, you could play, but because a reading has been given, they're then off for the light and everybody comes off. So I think it's kind of, what's the point? What is the the real drive here? Is it spectator experience or? And I guess it is spectator experience, but I guess it's to kind of have a vibrant game where, maybe that slowing it down isn't kind of a tactical nuance that teams are trying to use to wear the opposition down and to make them to do stuff. I guess that's, and that can happen. I think it's a good point as well about spinners, where you've got 2 spinners operating, you can rattle through them, can't you? But I don't know about subjective experience. Yeah, I'm not sure I've answered your question, Bigsy, because I don't really know what the answer is, but I'm not sure anybody does, do they?
Yeah, we've been on about this for 5 years on the pod, and I don't think we've ever come to a sensible solution. Maybe on the way out of the game, just like on the way out of a set of service station toilets now, you can say whether you were happy with the facilities or
Like
not.
an
Maybe,
emoji. An
yeah, maybe we
emoji,
get an
yeah.
emoji on the way out from, from the fans. But a more serious, more serious response. You know, we've got really, really experienced umpires now, so maybe there is some subjectivity in the way that they view it.
Mm.
And, you know, you've certainly seen some umpires when, you know, Steve Smith's had his 17th pair of gloves coming on for the session. He's told the 12th man, no, mate, this is ridiculous. Off you go.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
same with drinks and the same with, you know, new bats and boots and all that kind of stuff. So maybe it is actually letting the umpires make a determination of speeding things up, and maybe some in-game penalties. You know, I think that might actually then also sort of get the crowd reaction to that kind of thing, because I think the fines haven't seemed to work. The World Test Championship points haven't really seemed to work because teams
Yeah.
are still not necessarily racing through their overs. So maybe it is something that's in game that affects the moment, that needs to be considered.
I mean, a random thought I have just had is rather than penalise, maybe you reward for good over rate. So, you know, in game, you know, if you're up at a certain rate, you know, I don't know, do you get runs, or I don't know, or do you get a new ball sooner? I don't know. We're playing about with the game now, but it feels like, you know, if you keep penalising, it's not working. You've got to rethink it a little bit. You know, could we incentivise teams to get a better over rate? You know, maybe they get more fees or whatever. Maybe that's the way to go with it. They get an increase in fees if their over rate is over a certain number. But again, it's context specific, isn't it? Because in certain conditions and certain match situations, you might be able to ramp the over rate up, and others you might not be able to. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, mate, you raise a good point, and I think linking it to the new ball could be an option. But again, as you say, that might not always be the right
Yeah.
carrot. But certainly if you wanted that new ball, and you were told you can't have it until you've made up the overs that you've missed out bowling, maybe that's an incentive. But perhaps we'll come on to it on a rainy day on the Top Order podcast at some point when we've not got so much cricket to talk about. We'll uncover what we should do. Before we wrap up the podcast, a couple of bits of news. Let's cover predictions first, Jamie. So 2-0 in this series going into the test match tomorrow in Seddon Park, Hamilton. What are you forecasting? A fairy tale ending for Tim Southee, or England rounding off a 3-0 series victory? And you can't sit on the fence with the draw because the weather looks set fair, and England haven't taken a test match into the latter stages of a fifth day for a long, long time.
Yeah, I'm gonna go England win 3-0, and I would base that, you know, as I've said before, on England are clearly confident at the moment, and confidence is often a predictor of future confidence. So coming off the back of 2 wins, England are going to go into this feeling pretty good. New Zealand on the flip side, you know, lost 2. Confidence probably not where they want it to be. Equally, they're still very good players. So, you know, on any given Sunday, anybody can bring out a performance. So yeah, I'm going to go 3-0.
Brilliant. Yeah, look, I would. This podcast seems to be one where we've agreed with each other a hell of a lot, Jamie. But I think 3-0 to England as well. Really would like to see Zach Crawley go out with a bit of a bang for the series. He's probably the only question mark that I think the England media could possibly have at the moment is how he's going at the top of the order. So it'd be nice to see him get 100, which we know he can do. And then I'd like to see this pace attack just have one more game where they pull it all together. Atkinson, Carson, Wokes, who I thought was excellent with that new ball in that second innings, really bodes well that he got that ball talking. Particularly that delivery to Kane Williamson was an absolute cracker. Let's leave it here for now on the Top Order podcast. One bit of breaking news that has just come out on the cricketing airwaves is that Jason Gillespie, the Pakistan coach has resigned. My understanding is he was due to get on a plane to go out to the Pakistan series about 6 o'clock Australian time in Adelaide, which is past probably a couple of hours or so ago. He didn't board that plane. He's resigned. I'm sure there's more to come on that. His assistant coach services, Tim Nielsen's services, were dispensed with without his knowledge, which I think was probably the final nail in the coffin there for him to throw things in. But I think we'll probably cover that on a future episode of the pod. But that's some breaking cricketing news here this Thursday in the UK. This will be out in your feed as quickly as we can manage it, and we will be back, hopefully all 5 of us, to review this third and final test of this summer in New Zealand, and then also to talk a little bit about India, Australia, which goes into the third test match in Brisbane, before we go into then those more traditional Boxing Day and New Year's tests at the MCG and the Sydney Cricket Ground over the festive season. But for now, it is good night and good bless from us here in the UK on the Top Order podcast. We'll see you next time. Good night.